All right, thanks for joining us, everybody, for our June Learning Our Landscape presentation. I'm David Brownell from the North Olympic History Center. As always, we're going to record this presentation. In a week or two, it'll be posted up on the Jamestown Slalom Tribal Library's YouTube page. We will save time for questions at the end, or you can just type them into the chat box at the bottom. We'll make sure that we get to those. It's my pleasure to welcome Tom Sanford from the North Olympic Land Trust and Eric Kingfisher from the Jefferson Land Trust today. And before we get started, the North Olympic History Center wants to acknowledge that we do our work on the lands of the first peoples of this area, the Clallam, Makah, Quileute, and Hoh River tribes. We recognize the rich and important history of the tribal nations in Clallam County and commit our work to this tribal land acknowledgement to work together collectively to help preserve and share their history. And so speaking about collaborating with the tribes, that's a lot of what these two guys do. So I will get out of the way and let them share their screen and get going. Welcome, Tom, and welcome, Eric.
Great, thank you so much. As soon as you share your screen, it's amazing how it immediately moves where all the buttons are. So hello, my name is Tom Sanford, Executive Director with North Olympic Land Trust. It is a true honor to be invited here today by the Jamestown Slalom Tribe and the North Olympic History Center to talk about this amazing place. And I want to let my colleague introduce himself as well.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Eric Kingfisher. I work as the Stewardship Director here at Jefferson Land Trust. And so we work over in the Jefferson County side of things. And I've been working here since about 2008 and I've been doing land conservation work really since about 1999. So I'm way into this stuff and I'm excited to be here to help tell some of the stories of the conservation work that we do through Jefferson Land Trust and in partnership with North Olympic Land Trust.
So before we started jumping right into talking about the land trusts and talking about conservation easements, which I know is the topic of today, we wanted just to start by sharing a few photos, some things that help us remember and think about where we are on this landscape and what an amazing place we live in. You'll also note with these photos what an amazing place to have a photographer like John Gussman working in, who provides many of these pictures. And so I'd be curious, just kind of around the group, and folks many of you have your screens on, maybe using your hand, how many decades have you been here on the North Olympic Peninsula? I'm at 21 years, I'm at 2. All right. And what I think is helpful to see in all of that is we have some experience in our group, but it really then how does that fit in to a much longer history of this place where we just have this snapshot of how things are today. And Eric, you want to give us a little bit of that history side of things?
Yeah, sure. So we thought that'd be fun and helpful to kind of get us all on the same page about where we are on the planet and where we are in time. We are all here in this particular part of the world at this particular part in time in the time continuum. And so I have a few slides to kind of bring us together around how this place got to be the way it is. So if you think about where we are in the world, think about the entire planet and all the different ways landforms are shaped and different landscapes and different ecosystems. We're definitely not in a place like that, like a desert or a tropical jungle. We're definitely not in some sort of chaparral landscape, really. We're not like in a Arctic tundra kind of environment or in some kind of grassland environment like the Midwest or something. Think about where we are in particular and how it potentially got this way. And bear with me, but we're going to start with plate tectonics and think about, okay, this landscape was not always this way. Where this land base that we're on, this ground that we're standing on was not always particularly like this. But the way it is now has got a lot to do with this tectonic plate movements that make up how the world is shaped. So we have our own Juan de Fuca plate, and it's subducting under the North American plate, and it's because of that we have our mountain ranges. We have our Olympic Peninsula of coastal range along the whole Northwest, and we also have our Cascade Range. That has a lot to do with why our land forms look the way they do, why we have mountains, and why we have a trough in the Puget Sound. So if that's news to you, there's so much more to say about that. But most of us understand that we have this interesting underlying geology, which is partly why we have the land shape that we do.
And almost uniquely here on the Olympic Peninsula, someone told me another example of this once, but a round mountain range is not the kind of a thing you see elsewhere in the world, and it leads to some things that make this place pretty unique.
Mm-hmm. So then if you think about where we are and how that works, so in the bathymetry and out in the water, or in the water side of this map, it shows the ocean floor. You can see the actual edge, a spreading ridge of the subducting plate of the Juan de Fuca plate and where it's subducting. And then you see the mountain ranges from an aerial image. You can see all of this from this kind of spatial information, spatial data, and that's helpful. And what it leads to is then, like I said, a landscape that has all this topography. We have this sort of roundish mountain range on the Olympic Peninsula. We have this, the Cascade Range. And so this all was not like this even 50 million years ago. And then over the course of the last 10 or 20 million years ago, those mountains were formed. Then over the last couple 100,000 years, we've had a series of ice ages and ice sheets coming down and penetrating down between those mountains and covering all of the land that we're all standing on or sitting at right now. It was under an immense ice sheet, and up to about 5,000 feet thick. In Port Townsend, it was about 4,000 feet thick. And so that was not that long ago when this last final ice sheet covered this area. It was about 17,000 years ago, finally melted away. And that's really in the big picture of time, and the planet's been here for 4.5 billion years. 17,000 years is a very, very small amount of time. And as it melted away this last time, the ice melted away and the creeks and rivers were forming, and salmon came right back, and people came right back with them. So this is a land base, and I put this one in here just to demonstrate. Here's a LiDAR image to help you see, which is helpful. LiDAR image is laser imagery, or it's laser-based imagery of the landscape, where it kind of strips away all the surface trees and everything else, and just looks at the ground. And you can see these landscape striations, these big landscape scrapes that the glacier left behind, and that's all over the Puget Sound Basin and all over the North Olympic Peninsula too. So it's just a reminder, and when we really look at the data and look at the spatial information, that this is a landscape that was relatively recently glaciated, and that's partly why we have the place we have. The other part of it is, so that's the physical environment. Then there's all this interesting feature, all these we're not in an Arctic environment. Even if we had mountains this way or that way, we're not in a tropical environment. The reason is because we have this mild maritime climate that is mostly driven by a couple different pressure zones. There's the Aleutian low and the subtropical or California high, and they kind of go back and forth over the course of a time in a year to produce the kind of climate that we have here. And it's been relatively stable for about 5,000 or 6,000 years here. Which then, as most of our wind and weather comes from the southwest, a lot of that moisture hits the Olympic Mountains. And in this map that demonstrates the rain shadow effect, where on the west end, you get a lot of rain. The deep purples are, upwards of 200 inches of rain. And then just across the mountain range down there in Squim and Port Townsend area, you're only talking about 15 to 20 inches of rain a year. So a really dramatic difference in rainfall, 200 plus to down to about 15 or 20, and just in one place it's only like a 35-mile difference. It's one of the most dramatic drops in precipitation in the world. So that's partly why the place that we live and where we are right now, where the slalom have been since time immemorial, that's partly why it is the way it is. And we thought we would use this introductory time to kind of bring us all together, because it just helps us recognize, I guess, all of those things together make it a really special place. And there are lots of dedicated people in this place that are trying to take care of it and help protect it for future generations.
So within that hundreds of thousands of years of history Eric just went over in about 5 minutes, along in this instance, in this little blink of an eye that we're living in, this thing called land trusts start to come upon the scene. And we really want today to focus on the work of land trusts across the country briefly, but mostly about what 2 local land trusts in this area are doing, and how that work is really trying to do things that are protecting certain things we all value into perpetuity. And that is a really kind of a big statement for any small nonprofit to say, but that is the attempt here. How do we say, what is it we love about this place that is continuing and will continue to change? And how do we maintain certain values? How do we build certain values that are best for our community? So this is something that land trusts do across the country. And actually there's a few land trusts around the world, but land trusts are particularly big in the US. Concept really, it's kind of a weird start on the concept, really kind of came out of England. And as the landed gentry headed off on a crusade to I don't know, to Turkey or Israel area or whatever, that oftentimes their land would be left for someone else to take care of for them. Their land would be left in trust, regardless of what happened to them out on the crusade. How do they make sure that the values of their land are managed? And regardless of the pros and cons of the folks involved, that concept stuck. And what you see in the United States is there's currently 1,281 land trusts across the US. And they are all over in all different kinds of communities. And each community has a different land trust that matches the needs of that place. Together, these organizations have conserved over 60 million acres of land. That's bigger than the National Park Service. It is just a tremendous scale. If you assume Olympic National Park is 1 million acres, 60 times that by land trusts across this landscape. Of those 1,200, 465 are something called accredited land trusts. They're ones that have worked with the Land Trust Alliance Accreditation Commission, a national group that says each of these small organizations working in mostly in rural communities, have a certain level of expertise and knowledge and skill sets that they know are of the highest quality. You see in this little logo here, sound finances, ethical conduct, responsible governance, lasting stewardship. I'm proud to share that both North Olympic and Jefferson Land Trust are accredited land trusts. Both have now been reaccredited, well, twice, accredited 3 times, and are among some of the original ones of this in the country, with now over 465 now. In addition, this national group, the Land Trust Alliance, has selected a couple dozen land trusts across the country that they say are part of their excellence program. And again, a huge honor to be one of those, just a couple dozen of land trusts countrywide that are really seen as providing some of the best and highest quality services to their community. So you've all probably heard about Joe Biden's pledges during the campaign of saying we need to permanently protect 30% of our landscape by 2030, the 30 by 30 pledge. The thought here is that land trusts are going to be a key part of making sure that 30% of our landscape can be conserved by 2030. And for land trusts to do that, we really need to basically take that 60 million acres today and double that in the next 7 years. And that is some real work. That is stuff that we are deeply engaged in here on the North Olympic Peninsula, and are excited to share more. Final thing I just wanted to say about land trusts generally is that there's 34 of them across Washington state. In Washington, for some reason, we end up following county lines, more or less. Not really a good reason, it's just what we've done. Interestingly, like in Massachusetts, every single township has its own land trust. While I think Kansas has simply the Kansas Land Trust. And that's just kind of the nature of how things have gone. And we now want to tell you a little bit about our two organizations that are right here on the Olympic Peninsula. Eric.
Great, yeah. So a lot of you have probably heard of our land trust, or maybe not, but welcome if you've never heard of Jefferson Land Trust. It's a community-based organization, really. It's a nonprofit, and it's been around since about 1989. As a land trust goes, we're kind of in that average size for a land trust in Washington. You know, there's sort of a spectrum of sizes where that goes. But Jefferson Land Trust has been around since about 1989. It was formed by just a number of people who were dedicated to this place and recognized that changes were happening quite fast, and that there was an opportunity with this mechanism to permanently protect some of the most important places here that we all know about, or they were identifying at that point. And it really, for us, started about salmon habitat, and then it moved on into working lands and other open space ambitions. In 2010, we published our conservation plan, which was a big deal because it really set out a vision for about 100 years for this area. And we did this through about a 5-year process with our community. And in that process, we came up with these 4 main visions. It's a good read if you're interested in this kind of thing, and it's on our website. But the 4 main visions I put up here just as a sense of the kinds of things we're really working towards. In 100 years, we want to see habitat that is biologically diverse, interconnected, and supports viable populations of keystone species. Similarly, for working forests, we want to see large tracts of working forests that are permanently protected for stable and sustainable production, wildlife habitat, and all these other services. We also are working on agricultural land conservation. So thrive in 100 years, we want to see thriving sustainable agricultural industry that's prominent in the local economy, culture, and landscape, and it's supported by even more demand for local food. That's what the kind of things we're working towards. And we also have this sense of this place is going to have community in perpetuity, and we want this place to be a great place for people too. And so the wild and scenic character of our county can be preserved in 100 years, and in a network of trail corridors and recreation lands provide abundant access to natural areas and connectivity between our towns in 100 years. So we've been thinking a lot about this, thinking in perpetuity, thinking very long term. And then we also have our more immediate goals. And so we have, right now we're operating under 2024 strategic plan. And these are some of the kinds of things we do. We're focused on conservation, we're focused on collaboration, we're focused on innovation, we're focused on education. Those are our main goals. And these goals are part of the driving language for most of everything that we're doing as a land trust, as in our operations and governance. So increased connectivity, increased rate of conservation, et cetera. And this is Jefferson County itself. So if you haven't seen a map of Jefferson County, it's this strange shape that crosses the entire Olympic Peninsula. And most working in East Jefferson County, east of Olympic National Park, Olympic National Forest. On the west end, there's only 600 people that live over on the west end of Jefferson County, and the threats are a little bit different. We do lots of different kinds of conservation work. Like I said, we do habitat and biodiversity, agriculture, forest lands, and community-based lands, like urban open space and things like that. And so here's some photos of just some examples. So habitat like shorelines, habitat like riparian areas, river corridors, places for salmon. Also upland forest, habitat that's just upland forest. We also do working forest lands, places that are really productive timberlands that are being well managed, to keep those from being converted into other things. Lots of farmland protection in Jefferson County that we've accomplished with a lot of partners. up and down all the way into Quilcene. And so with that, I also put this map on here. It shows the areas we've helped protect across the county, and it's just outlined in white. It might be a little hard to see, you know, the county's outlined in orange in this map, and then what we've helped protect with partnerships and with direct acquisitions. We've got quite a mosaic now across this county that are lands that will never be converted to, you know, industrial or dense or residential or urban development. And this map I just put on here just to give you another sense of that. And here's some figures if that's interesting to you, the acreage for some of these different categories of protection that we've accomplished over the many years since 1989 with a lot of different wonderful staff, board members, lots and lots and lots of volunteers, and lots of community support and partnerships, including partnerships with Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe.
And I want to make sure to share that what a proud board member I am of Jefferson Land Trust. That's something we started, gosh, 5-6 years ago, was having the executive directors of each organization sit on each other's boards. Eric showed that county lines, and they are weird out here. Why we, I mean, Mike Doherty online could tell us all about the details of why it got made this way, and some people probably sitting in Washington, D.C. thinking drawing a line across the middle of the mountain range made sense for geopolitical systems. But it's a goofy structure out here. And therefore, we work side by side as land trusts to make sure that we're thinking about the entirety of this landscape. And so I'm proud to be on the Jefferson Land Trust board. Richard Tucker, the executive director at Jefferson Land Trust, is an excited board member here at North Olympic. North Olympic Land Trust, we got started 1 year after Jefferson Land Trust. There was a group from the Trust for Public Land working around the country, getting local communities fired up about starting a local land trust. And there's a whole ton of us nationwide that began in about 32, 33 years ago. And so we're this community-based organization, and our job is to conserve the lands and natural resources that are of value to our culture, economy, and our way of life. That's something I would argue that as an example on this call, the Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe has been doing since at least the last glaciation and probably long before that. It's an honor to be working side by side on things like this. Our plan is really talking about these next 5 years, and it's about permanent conservation of the natural areas and working lands that define and sustain this place. And the thing is that our landscape, private lands, we can do so much, but we really know it has to be a community perspective that is thinking about its land ethic, its relationship to place. And that's zoning eventually. That is things like personal decisions we all do in our backyards. And those things are key. And so we've made it as a top tier goal of really how do we help build community relationship with the landscape to foster responsible land use. And because of that thing I said earlier, that when we make a legal agreement, which we're going to talk about here in a moment, for certain pieces of property, we say we're going to do it forever. So we need to build these organizations to be structurally and financially sound to make sure they can meet those obligations. So then folks say, well, what is this ethic of yours? What is this land ethic? And it is pretty straightforward. Key is one is about habitat. How do we make sure we have habitat to support a diversity of the plants and animals of this place? And we are strong advocates and really push hard against any perception that suggests that a human species is not a part of this landscape. Humans are of place. That is just a fact. Resources. We know that is going to involve sustainable harvest. It was a big piece. Sustainable harvest of trees is a part of the need of this place, of food, of fish. And we need to be able to do all this in a way that is adaptive to climate change and supporting our ability to absorb carbon, for example, which is something we can do better than almost anywhere else on the planet. And then we recognize that we need a certain quality of life here and that nature has power to rejuvenate. It's known to build health public health. I had a little note on my wall for a while that said, "We are a public health organization." It is core to who we are and the ability of nature to refresh, delight. We need to be out, and it helps build art and culture, and it is just core and the bedrock of who we are. So we do this in our farm areas, we do it in our fish, we do it in our forests. That alliteration is cute. It does mostly capture the work, but I would highlight the importance of our wetlands. I would highlight the importance of our shorelines, and I would especially these days want to highlight the importance of our prairies. And so they don't always fit under the alliteration of farms, fish, forest, but it does help you get the idea of where that is. And so here's a map of Clallam County, and our organization has been involved with 94 properties across this area. And you can really see how that starts to turn into these corridors. Like here in the lower Dungeness, the power of John Willits to just piece together a bunch of opportunities about 30 years ago, 25 years ago, that have become this chain along Siebert Creek. But in addition, you know, key and beautiful areas like along the East Twin or the Lyre that are really a core to place. And we'll talk a little bit more about these in a moment. Collectively, this is 25 of our local farms. 25th was conserved back in April, the Dungeness hub. But 25 local farms in 25 years is one thing. 20 miles of river and stream footage, almost 2,700-ish acres of forest land, and 4 areas that are open to the public. And again, a couple more that are coming soon, but we'll talk about those in just a moment. So that's really an overview of these 2 organizations that, like I said, work in deep partnership. Another core part of our partnership is a climate alliance that we entered into a few years ago that, again, we'll talk about in a moment, where we are together really strategizing, looking clearly at the changes happening in this community from climate change and how we can build climate resilience in this place, how a land trust through land, what roles a land trust can play to help build climate resilience. There are certain things well outside of our control, but can our landscape help prepare us for the future? And we'll talk about that more in a moment as well. So Eric, back to you, and let's talk about we're talking about this land conservation stuff, but we haven't really defined what it means yet. We just made it sound really nice. So Eric, tell us a little bit more about what land conservation really means.
Yeah, and so in thinking about this presentation, y'all, we recognize that the theme of the conversation was meant to be around conservation easements and these land trusts and what's going on, what are these things, and we thought it'd be helpful to just describe in general, like what is the spectrum of possibility with conservation? What is conservation? And really, when we talk about conservation, we're talking about in some way or another protecting a place for current and future generations. And around here, the work that Jefferson Land Trust is doing with North Land Trust is like I said, working with the concept of perpetuity, trying to establish permanent protections on places on private lands. But most of us understand conservation as more of like a something that we do as a public, as a society, through our public agencies and public institutions. So we're all familiar with conservation in the form of, say, Olympic National Park. And so I put this map up here because this kind of delineates all the different kinds of conserved lands, not counting the land trust protected properties on the Olympic Peninsula. And so you see an outline for Olympic National Park, you see outlines for national forest areas, you see outlines for wilderness areas, and you also see outlines for state lands, or DNR lands. You see outlines for things like fish and wildlife lands and things like that as well. So there's a really big spectrum there. So if on one end of the spectrum is very rigid protections for ecological function in the form of, say, national wildlife refuges, or where there's very little human influence or involvement or recreation, let's say. Then you have things like wilderness areas and national parks. Then you have those places where they're protected for their ecological function, plus a lot of recreational values, as long as those values are in the leave no trace kind of arrangement in most cases, like in the Olympic National Park wilderness. And then you can kind of move down that spectrum, and you also have public lands that are state parks. You have state Department of Natural Resources lands. Those are properties that are meant to be producing timber or other revenue for the fiduciary trusts that they're responsible for. And then you move down that line a little bit, you have county parks, you have county natural areas, state natural areas, all these different kinds of conservation. And so what the work we're doing, the realm we work in, is what we have outlined in kind of orange and purple here. These are the properties we've helped protect in private agreements, in these otherwise private arrangements. So what we were describing before was all these public arrangements for forms of permanent conservation, or some kinds of conservation. Sometimes it's not so permanent with the public lands. And what we're doing here at these private land arrangements are these permanent protections between where land trusts own the property or otherwise facilitate their permanent protection in lots of different ways. We'll talk about those different ways just next.
Private citizens willingly working to permanently protect their land is really where land trusts hit their sweet spot. Helping the public do what when people want to make something happen, we help them make it happen. Is this one me, Eric, or you? I don't remember.
I'll take this one. Yeah. So this bigger question of just how we do it is what we want to get into a little bit with these next few slides. But we have different ways of accomplishing our missions, and the main ways in which we do that is through things like land acquisition, where land trusts become the owners of the property, and we also have these conservation easements, which we're going to talk more in detail about. But we also facilitate a lot of protection. We help make sure that the properties are getting in the right hands for perpetual ownership and stewardship as well. And we do this really through partnerships. I mean, land trusts are partnership organizations. We're functioning because of all the partnerships and all the shared interests that we kind of align with others around. So that's some
we are known for playing nice with others.
Yes, that's for sure. We do, and we get a lot done that way, where we have all these partnerships. And then the funding is also usually relatively critical. We can talk a little bit more about this down the way too, but we're talking about real estate, and real estate can be expensive. There's money involved, and sometimes we're actually buying properties. Sometimes people are donating properties to us. Sometimes we're acquiring conservation easements. Some people donate those conservation easements. In every case, there's some sort of financial arrangement that has to be acknowledged and considered in all of these things, because we're talking about real estate rights.
I think it's on the funding side, it's important to know about both these organizations is we oftentimes are able to do a big ability of working towards Chimacum Ridge conservation, the Quimper Wildlife Corridor, the Lyre Conservation Area. To do those big things oftentimes is private a donation of land of some sort, or a big state or federal grant or county funds. But really to keep these businesses in operation and working on behalf of the community, that is almost entirely thanks to the generosity of the people that live here. And our generous communities, we see ourselves as extensions of the community, working on the community's behalf to make things we all want to see happen. And it's only possible because of the huge generosity of the people in this place. Yeah,
I couldn't say it better. It's great. And so one of the ways in which we protect land, like I mentioned, is we own the properties. And when we own the properties, we have control of properties, we can make good stewardship and management decisions about the properties so that those conservation values that we are intending to protect over time will be well managed. So I put slides of a few properties that we have actual public access for up here. So we have a place called the Chiaqua Preserve. That's a slalom name for a forest up above the water. And we named it that, Marrowstone Island. There's a nice little trail. It's about a 50-acre property. There's a Illahee Preserve. That's a nice place to go watch spawning salmon in Chimacum Creek and Port Hadlock. There's Valley View Forest. That's a functioning sort of pilot community forest. It's a sort of first step towards our larger Chimacum Ridge community forest, and that's adjacent. There's Snow Creek Estuary Preserve right there at the head of Discovery Bay, which you all have driven by at one point or another. Which will get additional, there's some signage out there now. There's a little shelter that's being built there this summer as well. So one way we do this is we own lands, and we own, as a land trust, we own about 26 different properties right now that we manage, mostly for habitat function, but also some of this community connection and recreation function as well.
And information on going to many of these places can all be found on both the organization's websites. you head over west and into Clallam County. And similarly, we own some properties that are open and available. The Elk Creek Conservation Area is in the suburbs of Forks, has a nice 3-mile hike within it that is, I call it the Green Lake of Forks. It is just an incredible ability for folks just to walk right outside their door and enjoy a beautiful natural area. The Pished Conservation Area, right off of Highway 112, some of the best elk viewing and great fishing and access with amazing engineered log jams recently installed by the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe. The Lyre Conservation Area at the mouth of the drainage for Lake Crescent, one of, in my views, most stunning places on the planet. Is open, as well as Seabrook Creek Conservation Area between Port Angeles and Sequim. Just a nice 30 acres along the recovering Seabrook Creek that's also open to the public for things like walking your dog and being able to just be out in the community with really easy access between Port Angeles and Sequim. And like we said, all this stuff can be found on our 2 websites, NorthOlympicLandTrust.org and SaveLand.org. We'll share those again a little bit later. So that's one way we do it. We just, amazing piece of property, the time's right, the funds are there, we can handle owning it, we own it. We don't think of ourselves as a park district, we don't have rangers, we lean on the community to help us manage these places and take care of them, but we just simply acquire some property and help take care of it and make sure it's getting good quality public use as appropriate.
Perfect, yeah. And so another way we do this kind of work, so that's when we own the property. Sometimes we have big complicated arrangements to permanently protect properties. And so both land trusts have lots of stories where, and we'll share a few of these stories, but lots of stories that emphasize or help articulate all the different dynamics that go into permanent protection of properties sometimes. Sometimes it's not so simple as just raising money and buying the property. There's lots of other things that come into play. And we felt it would be appropriate to talk a little bit about Tamanous Rock. And then after this, we'll talk about River's Edge. So Tamanous Rock Sanctuary is an important 84-acre property here in Jefferson County that is has been an important place for people since time immemorial. And there's a big geologic feature there, what's called Tamanous Rock. That was threatened with some development right around there, and even the owner threatened to even blow up the rock for gravel. So there was a real extreme threat to this situation in this place. But through partnerships, we were able to arrange for the eventual acquisition of the rock at the time by the land trust, but in partnership with the Jamestown tribe and the state parks. So I put this map on here because it gives you a sense of where this is on the land. That's Anderson Lake Road that you can see. It's sort of going through the middle of the map. But then out in yellow is a property that was about 25 acres that the Jamestown bought back in 2008, I want to say, and that was purchased in anticipation that maybe eventually, maybe they could find a way to buy the rest of it, acquire the rest of it, which included the rest of the property south, which included Tamanous Rock. And it's a real long story because that landowner was very reluctant to do anything like that. But eventually he did decide to sell. We arranged to negotiate a deal based on appraised value and purchase the property, partly using a loan. And then we were able to hold it as a land trust for a while, but while Jamestown tribe arranged for their own funding and financing. And then we're able to purchase a property, or we could pass on the property to them. And again, it was a complicated arrangement that also included in blue there an additional area that was added to Anderson Lake State Park. So now we've got a much bigger conservation area that is right next to and expanded Anderson Lake State Park, but also now created the Tamanous Rock Sanctuary, which has profound significance for our tribal friends and citizens, and also just the public who've been going there for years. It's a magnet for people. It's a place that people have been enjoying going to and learning from for generations.
Sorry.
Yep, that's okay. I think that's the quick version of a very long story. But I think what the conclusion or the summary of that story is that would not have been possible without all sorts of different partners. It included Jamestown Slalom Tribe, included the parks, it included a funding a foundation that gave us a low interest loan. It included Northwest Watershed Institute. We were all trying to come together to figure out this is a critically important place that was threatened by the current landowner to do some kinds of exploitative land use on the property that would have devastated its significance otherwise. And we were able to get in there as a community to purchase, protect it. And now it's in Jamestown Slalom Tribe's hands and ownership and stewardship, and they're doing an awesome job. And I'm really just happy that that happened in our lifetimes.
And then moving over to Clallam County. Sorry, I don't know how to make, can you all see the thing that keeps popping up the top of the screen? I don't know how to make that go away. I wanted to go to the mouth of the Dungeness River. And what we're looking at here is looking out at the lower couple miles of the Dungeness. And we had done a lot of conservation in the area. We were able to protect a lot of the farmland over to the east, some stuff right around through Fish and Wildlife and the Land Trust of some stuff called River's End, Dungeness Valley Creamery, the Delta Farm with Nash's. And then what became clear to us is in this area we'd done all this work, this 104-acre big old piece of property. We had a landowner who had not been interested in selling for a while. You can see all of the lots that property was going to be able to turn into. And that landowner approached us and said, hey, I'm ready to sell. I'd like to sell it so it remains as it is. Could you all help me? And basically wanted to sell it at whatever it was worth. And quickly the Land Trust and the Jamestown Slalom Tribe figured out a way to get through. And in 2018, had an idea. And by 2019, we were fundraising. And in early 2020, the two organizations bought what we call River's Edge. And the intention with this was to be able to take River's Edge and be able to have it be part of some planned levee setback that was at that point about to happen closer to the Dungeness schoolhouse, and some levee setback that's really designed to create brand new salmon habitat. And so here's a look out at that area back in mid 2019. Here's our concern. What Randy Johnson at the Jamestown Tribe put this together. This is what we're trying to make it not become. And this is what we envisioned. This idea that we're able to get on this property, set a portion of it back for river, and the rest permanently protect for farmland. And so here it is from the aerial. Now before we knew we were wanting to set the levee back up north, and now the plan to set the levee back all the way through this area and make it one massive continuous landscape scale levee setback to create new floodplain and permanently protect the farmland. So that was all in 2020 was the purchase. And here we are in May of 2022. And after all the land deals and the right people in the right places, the Jamestown Tribe, who now own this portion of the river, were already able to create a brand new levee within months of the purchase. It was actually built late in 2021. And the restoration was able to begin to put in a brand new reforestation all throughout that area. Meanwhile, the county was able to set back the upper portion, and all of this new area was able to be created and the old levee removed. And as a result, the river quickly, in December of 2022, with a big flood that happened. Well, it was a flood that folks recall December 24th last year. It was cold in the morning, like 30 degrees. And by 4 o'clock that afternoon, it was 50 degrees out. And it had just warmed so quickly. And there was a small storm that came through. We had rain on snow in the mountains, and a big flood happened, and it filled this new area. And here's a picture of the old levee back in 1997. This photo is taken in the exact same location. 5 years later, but really this change happened over just a few months, with the river rehabitating areas where it had been earlier. We're actually on top of what was Town Road, and you can't quite see them. You can see a fin right there, but chum salmon were in there. This is within days of the old levee having been removed. And what you end up with then is conserved farmland, new habitat, and a partnership together to take land that was headed towards something else, and make it help meet our community goals through good planning, partnership. And a big piece of this one was over 250 households helping to raise $400,000 in a matter of 3 months to make sure that this happened. And so state, federal, local funding, tribal leadership, community donors together making something pretty powerful happen. And if you have not yet been down to walk the levee at the Dungeness, from starting at the Dungeness Schoolhouse, you have a treat of a lifetime. Similar to the Elwha, watching a big watershed in active restoration, you don't get that opportunity very often, and riparian zones can recover quick. And it is worth every time you can to get down there and watch a big landscape scale restoration occurring. So that's another example of partnerships and getting land into the right hands. So then beyond that, there's a tool that land trusts use quite a bit. And this is the title of today's talk. And Eric's going to really walk us through what are these conservation easements and how do they work. But Eric, before I pass it over to you, is the screen have that bar on the top? Can you see it, or do I just see it on my screen?
Yeah, it looks fine to me.
Okay, then I don't need to clean up my screen. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah. Great. That was awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Tom. And so conservation easements, this is something that maybe is not super familiar to everybody here. And so we wanted to take some time with specifically, really, what are these things? So conservation easements are one of the things that land trusts use to achieve our missions, to permanently protect properties. And it's a real estate tool, really. We acquire a form of real estate interest on properties through conservation easements. These are legal agreements that are made voluntarily between a landowner and a land trust, or even like a public agency, or even some tribes are doing this, to permanently protect a property, where a landowner is granting certain rights to the land trust to ensure permanent protection of their property. That's a right that they hold, and they're giving it to the land trust. These conservation easements permanently limit the use of the land in one way or another, so that the identified conservation values will be retained over time for future generations. So you all have seen maybe a property deed in the past, and you see that there's all these different kinds of exceptions to the deed, and sometimes there's easements for driveways or things like that across your property, or any given property. Well, conservation easements works somewhat similarly, where there's an easement granted to the land trust, and it goes permanently on the deed of that property. It goes on the title of that property in perpetuity. So they're simply documents. They're about a 30-page document that articulate what it is we're trying to do. It's saying that the landowner owns this property, and the property has these particular conservation values, and the landowner wants to grant the land trust the rights to ensure those conservation values are honored over time. In a nutshell, that's kind of what they are, and that's kind of how they work. So in the next slide, I've highlighted just some examples. So conservation values, what do I mean by that? Well, a conservation easement will identify specifically what conservation values are meant to be protected by that instrument, by that conservation easement. And so, it is baked into the language here. So in this case, I just grabbed one of our conservation easements. There's one that had conservation values that included forest and wildlife habitat, included riparian habitat, included scenic quality, and the education and scientific opportunity. Those are the main conservation values that are meant to be protected. These natural values, riparian, upland, habitat for wildlife, etc., needed to be protected now in perpetuity by the land trust. Well, how do we do that? Well, it says right in the statement of the document, the purpose statement, the purpose of the easement is to protect the conservation values of the property forever, and prevent any use of the property that will impair or interfere with the conservation values. And so once that purpose statement is articulated in the easement. There's several other sections of these easements, but the most important ones are where we describe, okay, there are some permitted uses and there are prohibited uses and activities that are consistent with that. So landowner will retain certain rights, like a lot of our conservation easements might have, like, say, a building envelope in them where they are going to continue to do their residential activities, build a house, tear it down, put a new one up, all within a building envelope. Those rights are clearly articulated where that kind of thing is consistent with the permanent protection of a property for its, permanent conservation values protection. And then there'll be things like prohibited and restricted uses and activities, like subdivision and development of the property would be inconsistent with the protection of conservation values in most cases. So that's kind of how they're structured, and that's how they're written. And every one of them is customly created. Every conservation easement that both organizations hold are specific to those particular properties, the specific conservation values that are meant to be protected, the specific land forms and features that are there, and the negotiation with the landowner at the time. So how these things come about, like we talked about before, we do a lot of conservation planning where we're looking at this land base that we know quite well as a community, and we understand where there are places that are really meant to be protected. Like Tamana Rock was an incredibly important place to the community and the Jamestown Squam tribe and everyone else. And so that came up in our planning and our understanding of this land base. In that planning, we are doing some prioritization. We don't have endless resources to go do this work, so we're always prioritizing, trying to be as strategic as we can. We're evaluating these properties, we're selecting them based on the conservation values that we're identifying out on the land and the opportunities available, and also the threats that are threats to the conservation values. We're conducting a lot of due diligence. We're going out there, we're doing environmental surveys and ensuring there's no surprises out there in terms of some sort of hazardous waste or something. That we're doing biological inventory. Sometimes we're looking at the property, getting baseline information. We're getting surveys to identify exactly where the boundaries of these properties are. Sometimes specific zones within the boundaries that we want to create, zones for, say, riparian protection, zones for farmland protection, things like that. We're doing a lot of fundraising to help achieve these things. These deals sometimes can be upwards of millions of dollars to achieve, and it takes a lot of work to find the resources to achieve these permanent kinds of protections. And then we do the real estate transaction. Once we get everything kind of lined up, we're able to go out there and then do the real estate transaction where we go to an escrow company and achieve the permanent protection through that mechanism, typically where the deed is then deed of conservation easement is then recorded on the title or in the county records and is part of the title of the property at that point. Yeah, so that's a very short version of usually a really long story. Sometimes these easements take 6 months, sometimes they take 4, 5, 6, 10 years. It all depends on the circumstance. But yeah, and then after that, what happens after that? Well, once we acquire a conservation easement, that's where the real work begins, at least as far as I'm concerned. I work as a stewardship director, and when the property is permanently protected through a conservation easement, that's where we're saying, okay, as a land trust, we are now promising and we're taking on an obligation that we will help ensure the purpose and terms of the conservation easement are honored over time. We have a responsibility to achieve that, and that the conservation values are going to be well stewarded over time. And so we do this in lots of different ways. As a stewardship program, we have different ways of doing this, but it's really centered on regular monitoring and associated landowner relationship building. This annual monitoring that we do is verifying that if there are any changes that have occurred on the property in that year, that those changes are consistent with the purpose and terms of the easement. We're educating the landowners we work with. We're partnering with landowners on all sorts of things. We are evaluating their reserved rights when they say we're ready to exercise this reserved right to build our barn or do this thing over there. We're double checking and triple checking, making sure that is consistent with the purpose and terms of the conservation easement. We're drafting stewardship plans or management plans to help guide some of that work that's going on or land management that's going on these protected properties. And we're doing a lot of record keeping. So a lot of this work is just preparing for if there was a challenge or some issue, that we'll have a lot of good records that we can always go back to, no matter who is in these seats of stewardship staff or in the board of these land trusts. As you can imagine, all this takes money too. I mean, this is not something that is, this is a professional endeavor. I mean, this is going to take a diligent effort for people for generations. And so how do we ensure that there's going to be resources and capacity over time? Well, for every transaction we accomplish permanent protection with, these conservation easements, again, are obligations that these institutions, these land trusts are taking on in perpetuity. And so one of the strategies the land trusts across the country use is that we put aside some money at the time of acquisition, or somehow have a plan to bring in that money. We run an estimate, say, okay, how much would it cost really over time, let's say every year, to go out and monitor the property and be prepared to defend and enforce these terms. And there's lots of different calculators that we've access to, and we put together to help us look at that and say, okay, we need to put aside X amount of money so that every year there's a little bit of money generated from the income of that money, invested in money to help fund our work. And that money will then be there so that if and when there is a need to enforce and defend the terms of the conservation easement against some sort of bad actor, then we have those resources available. So both land trusts have stewardship funds set aside to do that. And that is one of the strategies we use. And otherwise we sustain healthy financial governance and otherwise ethical operations here at the land trust that help us stay functioning. So that's how we take care of things once we've protected them.
And Eric, is this a good point? I had a couple of things to add, but I wasn't sure.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think a couple key things to keep in mind with this is these conservation easements are perpetual in that they stay on the title. So you as a landowner may I would love to donate this easement or sell this easement on my property with a land trust. And that easement now gets put on your title. And when you sell that property, that easement stays on it forever. It can't really be removed unless a judge determines that the conservation values disappeared for some reason. And that's very, 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 very rare. And so it's this way of making decisions today that even though land ownership changes over time, the values in the property are conserved forever. So that's a key part of it. And you may think well, why does a landowner want to do that? You could see why a land conservation group wants to put these on, but what's in it for the landowner? And 99% of the time, it is to hit those conservation values that are shared. In addition, there are some nice incentives that can help that person decide that. One is they end up being able to, if they're donating that value, let's say the property is worth $1 million before they do it and $500,000 after they do it, they have essentially donated to our society $500,000 of their land value. And they're able to take that as a income tax deduction spread out over up to 15 years. So there's some advantage there for some tax relief to encourage folks to do this. In addition, on the property taxes, folks are probably aware of current use exemptions and the ability of putting your property in open space or in agricultural or forest taxation. These properties automatically qualify for that. So you quickly see any property taxes you have greatly reduced and lowering the tax burden of the person for doing this. And then in addition, in many cases, people are selling that value. We work with many landowners who are land rich and cash poor, or as a farmer trying to get by making their farm work. And they're not in a position to donate a big chunk of their value. So we find state and federal grants and are able to compensate for them for that, make them whole, but still hitting those community needs. Tax purposes, the tax impacts are lower if it's a donation, extremely, but it is another way to do it. And so I just wanted to kind of share some of those reasons why people might want to get involved with this, and how it's in their interest to help meet these community goals.
Great. So we thought we'd tell a couple stories where we've implemented these kinds of things that give you kind of a spectrum of stories of how all these conservation easements are quite different. And so as I mentioned before, this map just shows all these different kinds of protected properties, many of which have permanent conservation easements on them. And so I'll run through a couple stories here. Here's one, like Matt's Forest. It was a 800+ acre property that has been protected simply with an easement that just strips away the development rights. It otherwise does not restrict the property. It's a place that is going to be managed for as a commercial forest, and there's no like forest management plan that is different than otherwise business as usual forestry. So that's like one end of the spectrum. We're very, very, very light touch, but permanent protection of the forest. So it always will be a forest land. It won't be converted and developed no matter what happens in the future. So that's one end of the spectrum I wanted to share. And then here's another one at the end of the spectrum. This is a property that was a donated conservation easement to the land trust back in 1995. It's about a 90-acre property with this extraordinary forest and all this wonderful habitat that's down on Dabob Bay. And it's been in the family for over 100 years. And they wanted to make sure that this place was permanently going to retain its conservation values, its old forest conditions, and not be exploited or subdivided and developed at any given time in the future. And they went a long way to making sure that happened with donating conservation easement a long time ago. It's one of my favorite places. It's extraordinary. Another place you might be more familiar with, this is Fin River Cidery. This is about a 50-acre property that was protected with a conservation easement back in 2009. That was a purchased conservation easement from the prior landowner. That was a circumstance where the prior landowner was really ready to move on. Her husband had passed away. She was getting elderly. She couldn't manage the farm anymore. It was a dairy, and they weren't running cows anymore. They were just managing the pastures. They're releasing the pasture for beef, cattle, and they were so excited to achieve a conservation easement on this property so that it would always stay a farm. And there's an agricultural conservation easement that has a habitat condition on the riparian zone along the creek there. And then otherwise it's always going to stay a farm with it, except there's a 5-acre building envelope for a farm, and otherwise, other infrastructure can occur. And so that's another story of a place that you might know if you've ever been. It's a beautiful place, and that very well could have been subdivided and developed. There was a lot of interest in from other buyers to do a lot more exploitative use of that place. So we're really glad that worked out. And then next, we've got, what is it? Sunfield Farm. Oh, did Tom freeze there? I think Tom's frozen. It means the slide. There we go. Oh, there we go. There you are.
Sorry. Working on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I hold on. Where's my slides?
That's okay. Yeah, so Fin River Cidery, if you've never been, you can walk around out there. It's a publicly accessible, restaurant and cidery now, and the story is really heartening. I mean, there's a lot of community involvement to step in. Once the purchase of the conservation easement was achieved, then the landowner was really ready to sell, but there was no funding out there just to buy a farm. So some local community members came together and started their own LLC to own it and manage it, or own it for a period of time, so that then they could pass it on to the next buyer for a favored right.
Eric, yeah. if I may, with Chimacum in general, there's a number of easements all throughout the downtown Chimacum area, Fin River right at the heart of it, that has really helped the transition of Chimacum into its thriving community it is today, with its wonderful forest lands and farmlands surrounding the hub of downtown Chimacum. And that conversion to these new entrepreneurs and the permanently protected land was really under the leadership of the Jefferson County Conservation Futures Program, coupled with the amazing work of Jefferson Land Trust, has really been core in that future of Chimacum. And I just think it's an important thing to throw in there and to Jefferson's horn. It's amazing the work there. And thanks, Eric, for keeping and sharing these Jefferson County examples. This is great.
You bet. Yeah. And we're not seeing the slides from our end.
Are you not?
This? No.
I have screwed something up. Okay, let me. I thought I fixed it. I apologize.
It's okay.
And
yeah, I think what you're getting at is there's this impact that some of this conservation work has in our local economies and our local communities. And for the Fin River story, we actually purchased, the land trust helped purchased conservation easement on their home farm, which is about a 30-acre property that was definitely threatened. They were didn't know what else to do, but it's an incredible place, an incredible farm, and got great habitat.
Are we back
By
in action,
purchasing-
Eric?
No, we still don't see the slides.
Oh
but
my God. Oh my goodness. I apologize.
It's okay. Well, we were able to purchase that conservation easement from the Fin River Farm home farm, which then they used the money then to invest in the startup of their cidery. And that became this business now that has over 60 staff members right there in Chimicum.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. And then Sunfield Farm is another property down in Havelock. It's just another interesting story where this important property was protected through this was using some NRCS federal funding for farmland protection. It included a bunch of forest land, about 30 acres of forest land, as well as about 80-acre property. And now it's
very close to Tomonimous Rocks.
Very close to Tomonimous Rock. Yeah, it's a farm school. So that's another example, where there's permanent protection of farmland and wetland there. Chimicum Creek, I couldn't not talk about Chimicum Creek real briefly. It's Chimicum Creek goes through Chimicum, and we, as a land trust, started working. Our first project was on Chimicum Creek to help protect salmon habitat, and so there's a photo of the mouth of Chimicum Creek where it enters the bay, and there's just so much we could say about Chimicum Creek in general and the habitat protection properties, everything from conservation easements to ownership. But there's our first conservation easement is right down near there where this photo is taken. Then I wanted to put something here about Tarbu Valley. It's a place that we've spent a lot of time and attention and a lot of partnerships with Northwest Watershed Institute and others to achieve some permanent protections and restoration. It's a major restoration area to bring salmon back, salmon habitat back, and so we've got several conservation easements down there on hundreds and hundreds of acres of upland forest and farmland that will permanently be improved now for salmon recovery and salmon habitat and other kinds of habitat functions, as well as good quality farmland. And we just couldn't not say something about Chimicum Ridge, and I could talk for another 2 hours about this, or 2 days about this, but Chimicum Ridge is a very important property. It's right in the heart of Chimicum. It's a landscape feature between Beaver Valley and Center Valleys. And it's a property that the land trust has been working to help protect for about 13 years. And our intention is to achieve ownership of it by the end of this year and manage it as a community forests. And so you might be asking, what's a community forest? Well, it can mean a lot of different things, a lot of different people, but over the course of the last several years, we've been working with our community to figure out what we want our community forest to be. And community forests to us are forest lands that are owned and managed on behalf of local people to provide them secure and reliable access to the ecological, social, and economic benefits produced by forests. And so our goal is to own and manage this property to produce these benefits and permanently ensure that this place is an undeveloped, productive place that'll produce all these different kinds of ecological benefits, social benefits, and economic benefits. The land trust also does hold a conservation easement on this place already. So that's one big step in its protection. And the next big step is for us to own it and manage it. And so you'll be hearing more about that if you're interested or would like to learn more. There's a lot to learn, and we're in the middle of we're just actually launching a capital campaign right now to help us raise the money that we need to achieve that acquisition.
And the beauty then of Jefferson Land Trust owning this is that it's ensuring that the management of the property, the timber coming off of it, the clean air, clean water coming off it, all is managed in a way that's maximizing benefit for the community, including some amazing partnerships with some of the local smaller woodworking groups and Center for Wooden Boats, so that as selective harvest of key trees are happening, it's actually helping build community and local community assets. It's just a really powerful and amazing place and project. So we then, are you good, Eric? Did I?
Yep.
Okay, good. We then wanted to say, well, what should you be doing? One, keep an eye out for these places. Over the last 5-10 years, both organizations have been really doing a good job, I'd say, of really starting to get signage up. So you start to see these places. So these are the signs you should be looking for as you drive around the peninsula, and you'll just start to notice these popping out and saying, whoa, there's one of those conserved properties. In addition, get involved. There are volunteer opportunities aplenty with these organizations. And By reaching out and saying, hey, I'm interested in doing that, you could quickly find yourself involved in anything from trail building to plantings to also strategizing or office support or helping with a fundraising event or whatever your passion leads to. And there are a suite of opportunities that are coming up to get involved. As an example, I wish I had put this up a few days ago before the event was officially sold out, but Jefferson Land Trust's annual Land Fest at Finn River is on July 13th, and it did just sell out. However, volunteers are desperately needed to help make that program run and be a huge support. In addition, North Olympic Land Trust's 8th annual family picnic is happening on July 30th at Olympic Cellars. This is just a big community potluck with a band and a chance for people to hang out for the day and enjoy each other's company and celebrate local land conservation. Of course, you can always donate. As I said earlier, these things are only in operation because of the generosity of this community. You know, both organizations are working with hundreds and hundreds of people in the local community each year to help keep this all happening. And it's not possible without your support. And it's very easy to donate on either northolympiclandtrust.org or saveland.org, or as I would encourage, to follow my own personal lead and donate at both.
Yeah.
And just another example that I'm really excited about this. This is David. This is the big version of what's happening in your yard. We are in the process at North Olympic at a couple properties of starting to put out these big tarps with a bunch of volunteers in this photo, try to kill a lot of non-native grasses underneath the tarps, and then they'll be removed, and the return and resurgence of prairie species and trying to get full prairie, the diversity of species in a prairie coming back. Both here, this is at the Lyre Conservation Area, and also a property we own in the Lower Dungeness. Also would want to encourage people to get out and enjoy their places. This here is at the Lyre Conservation Area, but these are amazing places, and the best way to support this work, in my opinion, is just to enjoy it. It's just a beautiful thing that is in this place. And then, how am I doing on time? Okay, I'm gonna be really fast and share with you something. We just together, our two organizations have just been releasing some climate resiliency data that we've been pulling out. You can find this on both of our websites. And Lexi, who actually I think is still on the call. Yep, I see. And a contractor just put this together. And what you see is this thing called a story map, a GIS interactive tool that helps you understand about climate resiliency on the North Olympic Peninsula. And it does some really cool things. As an example, it has some maps done by the Nature Conservancy that show what parts of our what parts of our landscape are going to be the most climate resilient. It also, this is fascinating. It has this map here that shows the impact of climate change on what date we get our first freeze in the fall. So it takes a moment to get used to this thing. But the idea here is this is in Julian days, and a blue means that the first date of freezing is day somewhere between 268 and 295. Okay, how many days is that into the year? It's like September. So the first day of freezing is up in the high country is in September. And then the red says, well, the first day of freezing is more like December. And so this is what we've seen on average in recent decades. Now we're going to go into future decades. And so what you can see now is this is only a couple degrees of temperature change but it's leading to a couple of degrees of temperature change that is saying we don't have our first freeze date in all of the low country until December in these future years. We'll start to think about what that means. How does it impact pests? How does it impact crops? How does it impact flooding? Small temperature change, big impacts. So that's an example that's on this new thing. We also did, I think, a really interesting study that looked at following the current plans, the comprehensive plans for our counties and cities. We look at what is the projected population from the Office of Financial Management, and what are they projecting will come here. And then you randomly scatter those new developments onto a map, assuming our cities, this is a big assumption, but assuming our cities absorb the same percentage of the population they do today. And every black dot on this map becomes a new home site allowable by our current planning by 2050. We as organizations have no desire to say, put up a black wall around this peninsula and not let people come here. Not what we're saying. What we are saying is, through good planning, how do we help make sure the future of population growth in this area has that population happen in the places we want them? Would we like to see the entirety of the Dungeness Prairie or all of Marrowstone Island essentially turned into housing developments? Or is this an opportunity, through good comprehensive planning, through land conservation, et cetera, we see greater density in our cities, and smart use in our more rural areas, keeping some of the values we're looking for. I also am really excited about this thing. It has some cool tools, like here in farmland conservation. Here's a map that has been determined of the most climate resilient farm areas. And then you're able to put on top of that what has already been permanently protected by local land trusts, to get a sense of the work in farmland conservation. It does the same thing in working forests and et cetera. There's also some neat maps that show the projected changes in wildlife corridors as you move forward, and lands that have the most potential for carbon sequestration. It's just a pretty neat tool. You can find it on both organizations' websites under our climate resilience area. It's only been recently released. I'm sure there's little bugs in it we're going to continue to find and continue to clean up. But it's just a neat map that helps us plan and think, and we wanted to share our learning with the greater community. So thank you for taking just a moment to let me share that. And so with that then, we just wanted to wrap up, leave a few moments here for questions and answers, maybe more questions than answers, and say thank you. Eric's and my contact information is on there. These organizations are full of people that love to answer questions or strategize in the community. So please reach out if you want to volunteer, you want to donate, you want to get more involved, you want to just have a conversation. And with that, Eric, do you have anything you wanted to say in conclusion?
No, I'm glad this happened though. I hope this was instructive for folks and illuminating in one way or another.